Automotive. I fix everything.
Today's project is a 2006 Ford F-350 with a transmission code P0713. Let's begin with the symptoms and the troubleshooting. My fuel mileage was decreasing rapidly over the course of several days. Then my check engine light illuminated along with a flashing tow haul mode. I plugged in a wireless code scanner to read the stored engine codes. I received a code P713 transmission fluid temperature sensor A circuit high. Let's take a quick look back at the instrument panel and notice the transmission temperature is actually off the scale low. Next, I'm including a list of the parts and supplies I used to repair the transmission trouble code. Here's the OEM part number for the transmission temperature sensor. The transmission temperature sensor is installed in the transmission valve body. The transmission must be drained and the oil pan removed. This is the part number for a high-volume oil filter and the accommodating oil pan. I'm also replacing the transmission remote oil filter. You'll need a minimum of 8 quarts of Mercon SP transmission fluid. With that in mind, be sure your transmission draining pan will support at least 2 gallons. Unlike engine oil, the transmission will continue to drip into the oil pan. When the oil stops draining, reinstall the drain plug and begin removing the oil pan bolts. Leave one loose bolt in the front of the oil pan and rest the rear of the pan on the subframe. Then remove the forward bolt and pivot the oil pan like a hinge. This will allow it to drain the fluid and clear the valve body. Notice the oil filter is still dripping. The transmission temperature sensor is located near the right front or passenger side front corner of the transmission oil filter. You can unplug the wire harness before or after you remove the temperature sensor. I decided to use the connector as a handle to rotate the temperature sensor 1/4 of a turn. The sensor is quite small and the connector allows a little extra grip. Once the temperature sensor is rotated 1/4 of a turn, you may need to wiggle it because it's seated with a gasket. Be sure to keep the pan in place because oil will run from the port. The oil filter is pressed in place. You may find it easier to rotate it side to side to remove it. After removing it, I immediately turned it upside down to drain any residual oil from the filter. The oil filter seal is lodged in the port. It must be removed or the new filter will not seat properly and could cause severe transmission damage. Here's a close-up photo of the transmission temperature sensor. This is the OEM temperature sensor part number. During installation, the locking tab is facing the driver's side. Rotate 1/4 turn and the locking tab will face to the rear. Note, the tooth for the electrical connector is facing forward when the sensor is properly installed. Do a tug test to be certain the electrical connector is fully seated and the sensor is fully engaged. Do not use a sharpened steel object such as a scribe or knife to remove the seal from the bore. This is actually a homemade tool designed to remove bandsaw tires. This is easy to create using a dowel, a common nail, and a length of heat shrink tubing. The round head of the nail grips the seal and pulls it free without the risk of damage. Next, I will install the high volume oil filter. Oil the seal with transmission fluid and press it in place. Notice the larger capacity of the high volume oil filter. Remove the magnet surrounding the drain plug and clean it prior to installing it on the new oil pan. The gasket is reusable and will fit the new upgraded oil pan. The cross member obstructs the oil pan installation, causing the gasket to shift out of position. I installed 2 of the oil pan bolts through the gasket upside down on the front of the oil pan. Then I loosely installed a couple bolts in the rear of the oil pan. With my thumb and 2 forefingers, I was able to press the bolt up and tip it forward and pull it free. I installed all the bolts by hand and seated the gasket with a 1/4-inch ratchet. I torqued all the bolts to 11 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern. You'll need a universal or a swivel to tighten the bolts obstructed by the cross member. After the bolts were torqued in a crisscross pattern, I used a circular pattern to verify the torque, checking each of the bolts in order. Next, I torqued the drain plug to 13 foot-pounds. Here's the part number of the remote oil filter. The filter bowl is marked for a 22mm socket. It takes a surprising amount of torque to break the filter free. The brackets and lines will flex prior to the oil filter giving way. A plastic bag is my substitute for rubber gloves. I pre-installed the filter element and the pressure plate with the spring facing down. Using a large impact socket, I press the spring tension with the palm of one hand as I rotate the filter bowl with the other. The filter bowl is torqued to 37 foot-pounds. Notice the flex of the bracket and the lines as you torque the filter to specifications. Verify the transmission fluid matches the specifications on the dipstick. Then add 7.5 quarts with a funnel through the dipstick. Allow the engine to idle and reach operating temperature. After reaching operating temperature, cycle the transmission through all the gears and then place it in neutral and check the fluid level. To top off the transmission, I like to use this flexible funnel to squeeze in the fluid an ounce at a time until I reach the proper level. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something along the way. If you did, please like and share. And remember, subscribers are always welcome.